Originally announced as Final Fantasy Agito XIII, Final Fantasy Type-0 is actually the first rated M entry in the franchise. Although originally came out on PSP in Japan only, it eventually came worldwide with an HD version, but unfortunately got completely overshadowed because it came with the 15 episode Duscae demo that people solely bought the game for, and I guess they just didn't play Type-0 itself, which that's tragic to just have the game get ignored like that. So the main premise is that in the world of Orience, there are many states that have crystals. The Milites Empire wants an assault in order to try and take control of all the crystals in Orience. That is where our characters come in, known as Class 0, who are special students part of the Vermilion Peristelium, which is a magical academy in Dominia Rubrum. It is up to them sent on these special missions in order to repel the Milites Empire to prevent them taking control of all the crystals. Despite that premise sounding simple, there is way more stuff going on, whether it be the whole entire political warfare when it comes to the states, what exactly is Class 0, why these students are deemed special, why these students have the ability to harvest Phantoma, since it's something only they can do in the academy. So there's a lot of stuff going on, not helped by how this game tells the narrative. It's a weird thing where the game goes in essentially with everything already established, and the characters very much know what's going on in all the terms and everything. It doesn't take the time to explain the terms to the player, so you have to try and figure out what the terms mean via context clues, which there's not a whole lot to go off of, or reading an in-game glossary that is meant to pretty much tell you all the important information, but one, needs to use in-game glossary to explain important information of the world should not be done, should be explaining with the story itself, and two, it does not tell you everything. There are other details you need to find out from NPC dialogue, but it's so weird how the game takes place in Academy. These are students. Why not use the school setting to, as a way, teach the player of the world, teach the player of the whole entire terms, narrative, everything going on, as opposed to just starting them in with everything already established. Hell, you're supposed to be learning about the camaraderie of Class 0, but aside from the fact that they're very good at combat together, I don't really feel like I know anything what makes them exactly in a friend group, aside from the fact that they're placed in the same class, and they all pretty much have the same person they all look up to, that they all call Mother. So there's just a lot of stuff just feels like it's just the player doesn't get to know. Like, based on what I've seen, people say in order to really understand Type-0's plot, you need to, 1, beat the game multiple times so the glossary can update more and more, 2, talk to every NPC in the game, because their side chatter will give you crumbs of information that you can then build together to understand more about the world. And then 3, read the Ultimania book, because the game itself doesn't actually fully explain all these details, so you need the Ultimania book, which just highlights how the storytelling in this game is very poorly thought out. It's done in a weird way, and then not all the important information is in the game itself. It's just a baffling way of handling a narrative. Now, despite that, I do enjoy the overall narrative, what they're going for, although I feel like the game's finale feels like it suddenly becomes a completely different game in places, but overall, the story is enjoyable, and the cast of characters, while Class 0 is basic, I wish I could see them more developing their friendship or emphasizing their friendship and camaraderie. They're decent enough characters, don't think I can say anything bad about them. At worst you can say they're just completely one note and just like, that's pretty much it. Each one has one character trait, that's about it. But they're not bad characters in the slightest. Just also the awkward part that because you have like 14 students to go through, it means there are some scenes where they can't assume which character you're playing as, so instead they just have the character be silent throughout the whole entire sequence, which makes some conversations awkward as a result. There are these little side events you can get for the characters interacting with not only with each other, but also characters from the academy, but like I said, they don't really add a whole lot. And it's weird how early on they make the point that you have to switch your character in order to get certain events, but then later on I feel like that never had to happen at all, and later events can play no matter which character it has during the conversation, so that part, like, it adds a bit more. Like I said, it's not a whole lot, and there's some conversations where the character is completely silent because anyone could have been in a conversation, so they just don't want to assume who's the one talking. Even for main story scenarios, it'll generally just have the characters in your active party be the ones talking for scenes, and then generally just have them say something like one line and then continue onward. So they don't really get a whole lot of the characters talking, even in the main plot. Like, it's just a weird way to handle the party. Like I said, they're not anything bad. I just wish they had more going on, especially when they're surrounded by these supportive casts who all have way more interesting things going on, whether to be part of the antagonist side or your side. I just wish there were more like them and had more things to offer, but this game's going for quantity over quality with the main cast. There are two characters in Class 0 that do get a lot more going on, being Machina and Rem, so by default, I just like them the most, but they do get more, because they do get more going on. I do like what they do with their story, but just makes me wish that, you know, more people in Class 0 had more interesting things going on. Especially since these are like two new students to Class 0, so you think they would do more to have them possibly be the player viewpoint character so you can see and learn about Class 0 dynamics, but I digress, I guess. Another detail of the world is the fact that people who die get entirely forgotten. Like, everyone's memory of that person will just be removed from their mind. They'll remember the event itself and everything that happened, they just won't remember who was the person there, who was the person saying the things. And I like how the fact that the characters will use this information to work backwards and go, okay, if I can still remember a person, then that means they're still alive, and use that as a good way of measuring if someone possibly has passed away or not. I do like that kind of thinking for the characters when it comes to how the world functions. But also weird how, despite this whole idea of everyone loses their memories of a dead person so they don't get tied down by the memory and sorrow, they all still have gravestones and a whole entire graveyard, which is weird how the game will explain the whole entire thing about a graveyard to the characters, but it won't explain to the player certain terms like Lissi or Agito, and just it's weird how you explain the graveyard, but not the more relevant, important terms. Now for the gameplay, which is an action RPG style. We have a basic attack, dodge button, a defensive option that could be a block or defensive spell. I usually just have cure because when I heal myself, and be able to equip two abilities, whether it be a unique combat ability of the character or some sort of offensive spell. And the combat I find it very enjoyable, especially the mechanics they include here being break sight and kill sight, which is generally after the enemies do a certain attack or something, you'll generally see a marker on them. If the marker is yellow, it is a break sight, which means it'll do massive damage you manage to hit them and that marker's on them. If it is red, then it's a kill sight and it would immediately kill that enemy, and this is a very cool way of doing things. They make combat feel way more snappy, but it's also the fact that it means that if enemies are way higher level than you can still take them out. Like, the level difference you can have in fights is very high, or sure, they may be able to just potentially one-shot or two-shot you, but you can still take them out thanks to the break sight kill sight mechanic. The issue being that because Class 0 has 14 students, each one has a unique playstyle, and some characters are infinitely worse to play as than others. Like, one on top of my head would be Cinque, because her playstyle involves a giant mallet that is incredibly slow. So there are characters I feel like they weren't properly thought out. In fact, I feel like the game heavily favors projectile users, especially Ace, who is essentially the poster character for Type-0, with his ability to use cards projectile, and his dodge being a teleport. Like, he's the most fun to play as, but it also highlights how so many enemies in this game, whether attack from a distance, or will have the ability to just get up in the air, which means any character uses a melee weapon is out of luck because they have to wait for enemy to get back down if they ever do. Yes, you can use magic as a projectile, but one, you have to anticipate the enemy being able to fly, which in some cases you can't see that coming, and two, there's not a lot of MP each character has. Sure, you can restore them with items, but from what I've seen, items like Ether and Elixirs, especially Phoenix Downs, are way more rare in this game. So it's not the most easiest solution to do, especially when that MP also ties into your defensive option like Cure or Casting Protect or a Wall or stuff like that. I just wish the game was more balanced, having melee characters like Queen, who has a fun playstyle with a sword, but if an enemy flies up to the air, well, now she's basically just waiting for it to come back down if they ever do. Other system to the combat is the fact that when a character goes down, you have a limited amount of time to the Phoenix down, with Phoenix down to this game covering the entire party at once, or the character gets removed for the rest of the mission or combat area, which sounds really bad, but like I said, you have like 14 characters to cycle through. This doesn't sound nearly as bad. The issue would be trying to keep them all properly leveled, which is way too difficult to do. So I'd say generally have like your top 3, maybe top 4 preference, and just don't put them all in the same party at once. Always make sure to have some of your best people on reserve instead, which is how I played the game, and generally it went fine doing stuff like that. But like I said, characters can be removed from the battle if they're KO for too long, but you have a good amount of time to revive them if you choose to do so. Like I said, in my experience, stuff like Phoenix Downs are rare, so I wouldn't go around just spreading them all willy-nilly, which is why the game's generally forgiving overall. Like, you go to traverse the entire world map, and from the world map, just go into a town, all your characters are back in action, done. It's only when you're in a mission, you need to stress, making sure you're very careful, characters don't get taken down. Although at times, it can feel like you can blink and characters get all their HP depleted, because sometimes enemies just deal a ridiculous amount of damage. Granted, you can do the same to them, especially with the break site and kill set mechanic, but this game just wants to get things faster and rolling, which, you know what, I like it overall. It's fun. It wants to be zipping fast, and it's enjoyable. Another core to combat is the Phantoma. So when enemies are pretty much KO and defeated, you can hold on them and then extract their Phantoma, which can be used for upgrades or side quests. I just find it awkward. You have to wait a bit after the character dies. You have to wait till their death animation fully finishes before you then have the ability to extract their Phantoma from their body. And you can extract multiple Phantoma for enemies all over, but just feel like, you know, could be a bit more snappy and everything, especially since their bodies take a couple seconds, their body will vanish, you'll miss their opportunity. So there's that weird quirk. One thing I do think is cool, so when you're fighting an enemy army, if you take out their commander in combat, the entire combat sequence is done with the other enemy units surrendering. You can then go over and get items from them. That is such a cool way that once their commander is defeated, the others will just immediately surrender, and that is a cool aspect of combat. Even the fact that you can't even KO or kill enemies that are basically surrendering, which is also another nice detail they put in this game. As for the game's overworld, it's not that good, like, mostly because it's very restricted where you can go, because the game will say you don't have access to this locale yet because reasons, or the fact that you have to keep going through the overworld to get through some story missions, and the enemies never change. Like, one thing I wish they adopted would be something from the game Shining Resonance Refrain, where in that game, because they're constantly going out to the same area in overworld, you actually have the enemies change as the game goes on. Different enemies to take their place, and they'll be more powerful and more unique. So I wish finally Type-0 adopted that, because I'm going to fight the same level enemies when I leave the Academy does get boring, on top of the fact that there's just not a lot to do in the overworld. There are side quests to do, but I find the side quests more in this game because they generally either go kill this thing at this locale or go fetch this, and that's about it. There are some stuff later on, like expert trials, which are unique side missions that are way more difficult, but those are the outliers because most of the side quests are generally the same. And there's this whole entire gimmick where in between story missions you have free time, but I generally find myself struggling to really use all the free time given, because the only pretty past time once you're past time is mainly to just leave the Academy and go do some overworld. Because I don't find anything interesting overworld to do, I'm not gonna leave the Academy, so I don't find myself more often than not just having the game automatically skip to next mission overall. Like, you can do stuff in the Academy, talk to people, but like I said, most of the side quests just become and there are ways to train your characters without needing to really leave the Academy as well. The training feature in this game is a bit weird, because it's basically just you playing as one character by themselves, fighting a whole bunch of enemy combatants, the same 3 enemy combatants. There's no variety in the training, and basically just, well, you just fight them and gain experience. That's it. No real special way of getting experience. It's just fight the enemies, get experience. It's basically just level grinding, but hey, now we allow you to get a convenient spot to do it, which just feels like a weird way of doing it. There's also secret training, which allows you to essentially save the game and it will close the game, but the longer you wait to your next play session, the more experience the character who's doing special training will get. Now, I wish this feature applied to the entire party rather than just one character at a time, especially like I said, trying to get characters probably leveled up is more of a hassle. Like I said, it depends on how long you're gonna go without picking up the game again, so that can pretty much vary. I've seen some people say to just use an exploit where you can just move the time forward on your system in order to abuse it, but if the main advice for leveling up from fans is just abuse a mechanic, then it sounds like the mechanic isn't all that great, or having 14 party members to deal with right off the bat wasn't all that great of an idea. Speaking of a weird idea, the level up system. Now, you get basic regular level ups for characters, but it's a fact they could also gain new abilities by getting AP. And there are plenty of abilities to get, but you only have 2 slots to equip them to. Like I said, you'll probably want at least 1 magic spell if the character by default is a melee character, no projectile. So in reality, you probably have only 1 slot for the special ability. And I'm not gonna lie, I just kind of stuck with the characters have by default, and I really felt the need to swap them out, because some of the abilities were just kind of like, probably one thing I remember actually swapping out was 9's jump ability, because by god, 9, you are a sorry excuse for a Dragoon. But that's pretty much it. There's also the fact that equipment is weirdly handled. Like, sure, you can rarely find shops in the world that sells you new equipment, so you have 14 characters, so I got like 14 characters equipped, which can cause a lot of gil. But my bigger issue is that the Academy does not up the equipment unless you complete certain challenge thresholds, like getting 200 kill sites or brace sites on one of your party members, which doesn't mean encouraging actively swapping between characters, but it's also very annoying. I can go several chapters in this game without any new equipment in the slightest, because I didn't fulfill a challenge that I didn't even know I even had to do per character. It really emphasizes playing favorites in a game that wants you to use everyone equally. It really wants you to play favorites. It's a weird way of handling things when it comes to getting new equipment. Like, I don't understand why it's like this. Granted, the game's directed by Hajima Tabata, and from what I've seen, this game, Crisis Core, and Final 15 all have very weird ways of upgrading the characters, but it's just such a weird way. I just don't like how that's handled. One thing I say I do like is the fact that you have chocobos in this game. You can ride them in the overworld to prevent random encounters. I must highlight this because we got a rated Final Fantasy game with the chocobo theme and everything. Why couldn't Final Fantasy 16 do that, you hacks? Although, I don't get why the Academy constantly plays Prelude. Like, this must be a big track that plays generally when you're a Crystal in a Final Fantasy game. So why is it just the only track that plays in the Academy? Like, that feels weirdly handled and really placed to play Prelude there. Overall, I do like Final Fantasy Type-0. I like the speed of combat is. I like the kill site and break site mechanics. They also add more utility to combat so characters can be viable even if they're low leveled. You gotta be playing more carefully, and it also means you can do more difficult tasks despite the level difference. It's a very cool mechanic to include everything. I just wish that getting new equipment wasn't so awkwardly done. They would have more to it, and the fact that sometimes enemies feel like they can just completely blitz you in a matter of seconds before you even blink. So there is that. It's the fact the game wants you to play favorites while also actively telling you to not play favorites as well. Listen, the biggest gripe with this game, like I said, is how the narrative is told, and it's just told so disjointed, or the fact that because the characters already know this, no one will say this stuff out loud or explain things for the player, despite the, academy setting. This is academy, these are students. Use the classroom for that. Instead, the classroom is used to instead get, upgrades for your characters, which is cool, but, come on, it's a classroom. Have them exposit about the lower information, even optionally, or stuff like that. Why use a book that honestly is weird when it comes to trying to scroll through, find information? You don't even know the background of the characters in Class 0 unless you read that book. Was just so weird, especially when the game's trying to emphasize Class 0's whole entire bond and friendship, but doesn't really do much with it. Like I said, I would have preferred if Machina and Rem, who are new students at Class 0, could have been instead these people who were the player characters. They could have been the main characters per se, because right now I want to say Type-0 has a main character as a poster boy being Ace, but honestly, all of Class 0 could essentially be the main character because they all have just a one-note tree and not much going on, so none of them really outshine the other in that regard. So like I said, this grabs your story, but gameplay, it's just fun to play. It's super fun to play. As I said, there's some characters I don't like to play as, but those are very small compared to the roster I like. I will say also, the game's AI for your companions can also be weird at times. There are some times where, despite me doubting enemies can hit them, I've seen characters just not attack the boss at all entirely for some reason. So there is weird quirks like that. But I also noticed how there is one point you gotta fulfill certain challenges in combat, and I noticed the AI is flat out allowed to break the rules, so only the player had to follow the challenge, which actually is convenient because some of those challenges I was like, I'm not prepared for this, but the AI went, I got you, I'll just effing cheat. So there is that possibility to the AI when it comes to that segment of the game. Overall, I do enjoy Type-0, and it does suck that the game got overshadowed because people mostly bought it just for episode Duscae, and that's pretty much it. But it is a cool game itself, and hey, it's the first rated M Final Fantasy title, so there is also heads off to that. So Type-0 is pretty cool. Wish I had a better story. Wish I had a story conveyed better. Wish I had less cryptic upgrades. That's it. Good day.